Live. You want to know something weird? I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what's weird. Here's how we're gonna start this week's show. When I go in to edit the audio for these episodes, the first like 15 seconds are absurdly loud. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's StreamYard. I don't know if like right out of the gate we're all just like right in the microphone, or if we're all super hyped to be here. But it's like the first 15 seconds, my sound waves are like peaked, and then everything levels out.
Now that you've said something, I noticed it.
Did you?
It's not just in the replay. I noticed it now. Also, the intro song was sped up for like the first few seconds.
Yeah, sometimes that song is weird. It like jumps weird and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's StreamYard. I'm just going to go ahead and blame it all entirely on StreamYard. But welcome everybody to this week's CASAA Live. We are here. We are live. In fact, we are actually live. I don't want to spend too long on hey, how are yous? But hey, how are you guys? How's it going? Alex, Kristen?
Doing good. And I will just also share with the folks who were not in the pre-show, which is everybody watching. We have decided that my personal grooming and hygiene is the barometer for how we're doing in COVID. And so
yeah, I told Alex that now he looks all clean cut. The pandemic must be over.
We're apparently doing better.
Yeah.
Little known fact, CDC bases their guidance on the length of my hair.
Yeah. But you guys will know if Alex starts to grow it back out, everybody mask up. We're back in the weeds. It's getting rough, But as long as the hair stays short, we're all good to go.
Give it another 6 months and some more depressing news, and y'all are screwed.
Oh
yeah. Kristen, how are you doing this week?
Well, I missed a lot of the pre-show because I was having computer issues, but I know we were talking about the weather, which we tend to do on this show a lot. I don't know why, but Alex was talking about the big pile up. And what was that? Was it in Philly?
Pennsylvania. No, it's near Harrisburg.
Harrisburg. Okay.
I-81.
Yeah, and I had seen that, and we had this horrific ice storm. I don't know what you'd call it, where it was bringing down trees and fences, and you go outside, and there was just icicles hanging from wires, and my whole back porch and back driveway was just a skating rink. I mean, it was, my poor dogs were like, their paws were sliding off like this and stuff. And now it's all melted, and it's like, we got a dump of snow last week, and winter's holding on. It just doesn't want to let go. But they say, what do they say? March is like in like a lion and out like a lamb, or whatever they say.
Yeah.
Like
so now we had a little bit of spring, and then it was April Fools after that.
Right.
But, it's good to see everybody out here in chat as well. I'm gonna every time, man. Dart Frog Paul. Good to see it. I always like in my lysdexic brain is like Dog Fart Paul, but it's not. It's Dart Frog Paul. Skip is in chat. Breeze Tones, Adrian, Daniel, Mallory, Gates is here. Ern, the wee baby Seamus in the Yoha community. We refer to him as Sea Moose. So Yoha Sea Moose. Sarah is here. Yes, lots of folks here. Mark Slitz is here. Yes, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. So this week we do have a special guest, which we'll be bringing on in just a moment here. We have Michelle Minton with us this week. We're going to be talking about the all great and powerful FDA. And at the end of the hour, we will have some legislation from Alex. We try to postpone that until the end when we have guests on. Michelle will be welcome to hang out for legislation if she chooses to. Otherwise, she can get out of here for that boring stuff.
Try to enjoy the rest of her weekend.
Yeah. But I guess if everybody here is ready, then we can roll that beautiful bean footage and get our guest in the air. What do you say?
Go for it.
Do the thing.
All
right, let's do the thing. Michelle Minton, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us this week.
Yeah, happy to be here.
We will reserve the final "Hey, how are you?" for you. Hey, how are you?
Hey, how are you, everyone? It's nice to hear. Logan, are you from Pennsylvania?
No, Western New York.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say it's nice to hear my last name pronounced the way the way I pronounce it. Most people pronounce it Minton, which is correct. It's totally fine. But it's where I grew up, it was Minton.
Yeah.
There's just like, it's like one M to the T to the kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Ah.
It's also
Why
good
through that
for you
eye?
again. I don't even know if you remember this or not, but there might be some people here who do remember my old podcast. This is before I ever joined CASAA. I used to do a podcast, which I think every CASAA member was on at some point or another, called Rise and Vape. But Michelle was the first person that I ever interviewed for that podcast.
Wow, good
Years
score.
ago. Yeah, and we talked a lot about our good friend Bloomberg at the time.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was a great time. Great time. Fortunately, we're still talking about the guy. It never ends, does it?
Mark says my favorite Google search is fear Michelle Minton.
I will say, with these billionaires, it does end at some point. I used to write about internet gambling a lot and sports gambling, and the big fight there was between like little groups like where I work and Sheldon Adelson, who's one of the richest billionaires in the world at the time. And that issue, we won functionally. Internet gambling became a legalized industry, and it was late in his life, and he just kind of backed away from it for the most part. So like, and now I haven't really thought too much about that issue in a long time, because it's just an industry that's going, it's moving, it's growing. So there can be an end even when you have a billionaire involved.
Wow.
It's just interestingly that the internet gambling was one of the things that actually got me more active in CASAA, not because I was doing internet gambling, but one of the first things I started doing was the Fight for Your Right to Vape Daily Action Plan on the weekends, which was promoted by a guy, Matt. Why am I drawing a blank on his last name? I'm horrible at names. I apologize, Matt. And it'll come to me eventually. But Matt was, I think he was like the chair of the Texas Poker Players Alliance.
Oh,
yeah. And so he was the one that brought a lot of the advocacy tools to CASAA back in 2013, awesome. 2014. So
yeah. That was another really consumer-driven policy movement, because there were so many poker players who were making their careers and their livings, at least in part or in full, off of internet gambling. And then all of a sudden you had the government coming in saying, we're going to shut it down, and random people saying it's evil and it's attracting children to lose their livelihoods. It was a lot of similar arguments being made, but they won. We won on that issue. It's over now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It is just nice to start one of these out with lots of optimism. So thank you for that. We can defeat billionaires, you guys. We can, in fact, defeat billionaires.
People don't always get what they want.
Yeah. Well,
that's a good segue, though, into, so how did you go from that into vaping? Was it just a natural thing?
No, it was like, so when I first got to DC in 2007, I was in my early 20s, and a lot of the people I was working with in the libertarian circle in DC were around the same age group. I was shocked at the number of smokers. I was shocked. I was like, I thought this was a thing that was over. And within right before I started writing about the issue, almost all of them switched over to vaping, one device or another. And they all kind of, switched around to different devices over the years. And then I started hearing, these public health groups coming up and saying this is, the devil and all this other, and the government talking about banning them. And I was like, I've watched too many of my friends completely quit smoking this way. So that's what got me into it. And I'd been a smoker when I was in college, pretty light smoker, but once you quit, it's still there always kind of, you're like, oh, I'll bum a cigarette off someone here or there. And, then I tried vaping, and I'm like, oh, I'll never smoke again. Like, if I ever have the urge, I will just use a vaporizer instead of going to cigarettes. So as soon as I realized that, I've never even thought about having a cigarette ever again. Oh, I guess I still have dreams every once in a while.
Yeah, every now and again, I'm like, man, like if you see somebody, if you're out drinking and somebody goes out to smoke, I haven't had one in close to 5 years, but every now and again you get that little itch.
Yeah.
And you just vape through it. You're just like, it's fine.
I'm weird that I still like the smell of cigarette smoke. I mean, to me, it's like fireplace smoke or my dad's pipe smoke. I'm not talking about that stale smell on people's clothes. I'm talking about just sort of fresh. It's just like smelling a wood fire to me. It still smells good. Now, I did try tasting one maybe a year after I quit. So this would have been back in 2010 or 2011. And not the taste, just the smell. It's not the taste.
I do actually. I mean, I still have the occasional cigar, the celebratory cigar for
Well,
things.
those never smell good to me.
But yeah, I haven't had a cigarette in close to 5 years. But in the realm of tobacco products, cigars and cigarettes are two different animals.
Well, that's fascinating that you were just sort of thrown in the deep end, Michelle, that you had so many people around you, because that's one of the things that CASAA was working towards, was the more people who vape, the more people who don't smoke or vape would know somebody who vapes, and hopefully that would make a difference in policy and such. And I remember when you first started coming out and writing about it, I thought, whoa, she's just coming out punching. And so I guess you had a lot of experience with it, because all that sounded familiar to you, right? It's like with all the gambling stuff, it's like, oh, here we go again. It's just a different vice, I guess you could call it.
Oh, and it's all a lot of the same people, the same universities, the same mechanism, the same government.
Really?
It's because it's cyclical, it's moral. All of this stuff has been around. It's part of human. It's just part of human culture that you have somebody likes something and somebody else wants to control it for financial gain, and then they will work with people who want to control it for moral reasons or just control. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with morality. It's just literally about power and control.
Wow. And that's frustrating. That's hard to fight. And then they give that power to the FDA, and then we get articles like yours that just went, I think everybody should read that one about the new commissioner fixing, and the links are in the description down below. You guys have put them in ahead of time. But yeah, just the one that the dysfunctional regulation one was the one that said we need to get Michelle on. It's been too long. We waited too long to get her on. And then, but I did remember reading this one earlier in the month, in March, that is, about the commissioner saving the agency from itself. And it was just one of those, it's like a whistleblower thing. But nobody's talking about it. I mean, mainstream media, or even in the vaping community. I mean, they should all be like outraged with some of not outside of the vaping community should be outraged about some of this stuff.
I agree. Yeah, that emanated from me reading. Richard Williams he worked for the FDA for 30 years, and he's an economist, and he wrote this absolutely fascinating book, because people who leave FDA almost never do what he did, which was talk very frankly about what life was like. And I was reading this concurrent with former Commissioner Kessler's book, and whether how honest he's being or not, he's the commissioner, so people aren't necessarily who work at FDA going to tell him like, oh, we don't have to actually protect anybody, we just need to stop people from attacking us. So no one's going to say that to the commissioner, so he just may not have seen what life was really like. But Richard Williams was talking about this sort of stuff where he would say, like, my job is to do cost benefit analysis on a proposed rule. We have this rule, let's say it's to protect people from foodborne illness in raw oysters, and somebody's like, so we have this big rule that we think is going to protect people, and I've done the analysis. It's going to cost X number of dollars to the industry, especially small businesses, and how many illnesses is it going to reduce? Basically 0. And then he'll have someone come back and be like, you need to do it again because we want this rule. And so he's functionally a whistleblower here, and people aren't really paying attention to it, which is shocking to me. And so I was thinking about what Congress, if you read the book, one of the things Williams gets into is why some of this stuff hasn't been fixed. What are the incentives that allow this culture to continue existing and getting worse, honestly, within the FDA? Congress isn't really going to be motivated to fix it right now. It would just require much more embarrassing, many more people like Williams coming out and talking about what life's like. And there seems to be incentives for people to not do that, because almost nobody ever does. But a commissioner, a truly ethical and motivated commissioner, could do small things that would start to shift the internal culture of the FDA. And I think the biggest thing, like I said in my piece, in my op-ed, was the biggest thing he could do is stop protecting FDA's reputation and start talking about these problems. So because that's the only way. Congress doesn't want the commissioner to do that, because then they would be forced to take action. They want the public to just think everything's hunky-dory, everything's working great, because they can just pass things off to the FDA and say, look, I did it. I solved, the youth vaping problem, or whatever the problem is. But if the commissioner gets up there and testifies and says, we have people who are engaging in malfeasance, we have people who are lying, they are making up numbers, we are putting out regulations that cost money and don't protect the public, then Congress or the president would maybe be forced to take action on this agency. But right now it's just a mess, and they're asking the government for more money to fix the mess. It's like, that's you can't just cover the bleeding wound with money. That's not going to actually solve the problem?
I mean, I have several questions, but one of the things you noted in the article, and I think that was also coming from Richard Williams's book, is this whole idea of FDA wanting the rule and to expand their regulatory scope. I can imagine, I can understand that from like a company standpoint, Altria, for example, diversifying and getting into food and other things, that makes sense. But for a government agency, like, what's the profit motive there? It's not like they're going to pay their employees anymore, or anybody's, the stock is going to benefit or anything like that. So is it just that like base human reptile need for control and power, or is there actually some sort of financial incentive there?
Well, it's a little column A and column B, and it kind of depends on who you're talking about. So they all have their, the commissioner has completely different incentives than, a Richard Williams economist type person, or a lower level manager even. And a lot of it, it's not necessarily greed. It's not like I want to be powerful or anything like that. Some of it is, we have a budget, and within this budget supports these projects and these employees. And we want to make, each agency competes with the other agencies for their piece of the budget. They go to Congress, they say, we all think of it just staying the same or going up, but sometimes the budgets go down. And when that happens, you have to take money away from projects or lay people off. And if you're a manager or whatever, you don't want to do that. You don't want to see your projects go under. You have to lay off people. So some of that is just normal, not necessarily, unethical kind of drive to just keep what you have. But a lot of it is, we want more money because, and I think a lot of it is this, the ends justify the means kind of thinking, where, well, we get this power and we're so good. We're so, our intentions are so good that if we have the power, we'll eventually be able to do really good things if we get it. So like when Commissioner Kessler started to, when he finally decided that the FDA was going to take over tobacco, he literally said this in his book. We had no idea what our goal was. We had no idea what the goal was by having FDA take over tobacco regulation, but we did it anyway. It's like, and because they fully believed in their goodness and rightness. And they just, a lot of times you'll see this with CDC, they'll go up to Congress and they'll say, this is just a huge problem. The CDC can work on it, but we need more resources to do that. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think this is part of the problem with the pandemic, whereas you see FDA now and CDC and NIH saying we need more money for preparedness to get prepared for the next one. And you're like, yeah, but you didn't use the money you had before to prepare for it, because they were going to Congress saying, well, we have this obesity epidemic or this vaping epidemic or whatever it is, because that's how they were getting money. This thing of, and smokers know this, that especially people who are clinicians who are trying to help smokers quit, this idea of if you don't quit, you're going to get lung cancer or heart disease, 20, 30, 40 years from now, is a really not very motivating for someone when they say, yeah, but I can just have a cigarette tonight and that feels good, and then I'll quit tomorrow. And that's kind of what it happens with agencies go up to Congress and they say, like, well, a random pandemic could happen maybe sometime in the next 50 years. And Congress is like, yeah, okay, well, but this other guy's talking about China and nukes, so maybe we'll give the money there. So instead they go up and they say, we have a vaping epidemic, kids are dying in the streets, because that gets people more concerned and more willing to loosen up their purse strings. And so, over the last few decades, all of our health agencies from local states up all the way up to the World Health Organization have been focusing on what they think people care about and not necessarily what we should really be paying attention to be prepared for big things.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I would say that research and academics do the same thing. If as long as there's some kind of emergency, we're going to study this. So give us some money to study this. So vaping, is emergency, right?
I just saw this with a study. A few studies have come out saying, they're talking about how, everybody thought that light to moderate alcohol consumption was good for your heart, and we're going back and rechecking all that, and it's not good. And you're like, why are you what? Like, look, science is wonderful, and figuring out all of the particulars of risks at all different levels is great. Go for it. But there's such an intense focus now on this. When what we're talking about is the difference between zero risk and maybe like 1% risk. Why are you so focused on this instead of heavy drinkers, binge drinkers, people who get drunk and drive, all of these more important things? And it's because there's money out there, there's grant money out there to study this stuff in particular, because people, not necessarily Bloomberg himself, but people like Bloomberg have for a very long time wanted to get rid of this idea that there were any benefits to drinking, because it remains one of the, not just alcohol industry, but people who like to drink, the biggest rhetorical hurdle to saying, well, it's just all bad. Drinking is all bad. We can tax it, we can ban it, we can restrict it, all this stuff. But people are like, yeah, but it's good for your heart. And so like the researchers and the activists who hate alcohol and hate the alcohol industry really run up into that rhetorical issue. And so they've been trying to bust that myth, the myth of alcohol having any health benefits whatsoever at light and moderate levels of drinking.
Now, it seems like anything with human health is so hard to figure out what's right. I mean, look at just going from dietary stuff, back and forth with eggs are good, eggs are bad, saturated fat is bad, now it's good, now it's bad again, but not that kind of saturated fat, this kind of saturated fat, but we're not really sure. Sugar's just fine, it doesn't make you fat, now sugar makes you fat. I mean, it's such an imperfect science that you really can't believe anything that what comes out, and especially when it's based on epidemiology or cross-sectional research and stuff. And you do a lot of research as far as studying how these policies work, right?
And I'm actually, I have a master's degree in nutrition, so I've seen this.
Oh, do you? Okay.
People don't understand how nascent of a science nutrition actually is, how little we do understand about it, how much is known. And yet I see a study coming out and then everyone's saying, well, that solves the problem. We now know alcohol is good or alcohol is bad. You're like, no, man, you can't. One study. We know very little about how the body works, honestly. We know very little about how specific nutritional elements work. But I would say most things in life with regard to nutrition are U-shaped curve. If you don't have any, you're at a higher risk. And then your risks go down as you have more. And then if you really start to overdo it with the thing, your risks go back up. U-shaped curve is pretty common for almost every nutritional element that you can put into your body. It's just like good, like, so you have none, not good, good, better, worse, right? Like sugar, fat, cholesterol, whatever it is. But
I was just going to say salt. Like salt is something like we all need, but everybody's like, don't have salt. Leave salt out.
That's changed now too. They changed the standards on that too, that only some people have to worry about their salt. I mean, it's
finally good. Yeah, the salt is one of the most misunderstood of all of the nutrients, I think, because it is absolutely essential.
Right, exactly.
It's like, besides oxygen and water, I think it's like one of the most essential nutrients for.
I mean, it was so essential that it was currency for us at one point.
Wars have been fought over it. It was soldiers were paid in salt and all this other stuff. It's really fundamental. And some researchers for decades have been talking about kind of trying to name an instinct, like you have thirst and you have hunger, and they've been trying to come up with a word for salt hunger, which is kind of an instinct almost. So for example, in clinical research, they'll give people a placebo or a salt pill, and then they will have them all eat together, and they'll put salt shakers on the table, and they've measured how much they normally eat generally, how much salt they normally consume. And what they found is that the people who were given the salt pills wouldn't add salt to their food, and the people who reverse it, right? So like whoever didn't get the salt pill would add salt, so that both of the groups functionally, instinctually just adjusted their sodium intake. So it's this thing of like, yes, some people are salt sensitive. Some people's blood pressure will go up. It's usually there's some kind of dysfunction happening in their kidneys or in their body elsewhere. They have a genetic predisposition, but most of the population doesn't have that. And some actually have inverse sensitivity. So if they don't get enough salt, their blood pressure will go up, because the body is, what it's happening is your body is it uses salt to balance your water and your blood levels and all this stuff. So that's what's happening is if you don't have enough, your vessels will constrict sometimes. Your body's like, we need more blood to pump faster. We need to get this blood clean. So we need to like constrict our vessels. It's very complicated and interesting, but also a very new aspect of science that I just laugh every time I see a headline come out saying, we've solved this problem. We now know this about nutrition. I'm like, you don't know anything. We don't know anything.
I'd love to just sit and pick your brain on that for a while, because one of the things, it's funny because one of the things that vaping got me into was reading research and having to learn how to read stuff and what a cross-sectional study means and what, longitude study, all these things, how epidemiology versus clinical versus all that other stuff. And after a few years of quitting smoking, I decided after my mom passed away that I wanted to lose weight, and I ended up going on low carb. And of course, when you do low carb keto, everybody's like, that's so dangerous. It's deadly. Fat is bad for you. And so I did a whole deep dive into research or into nutrition, and found out there's a very close parallel to what's going on in vaping and the claims made about vaping, and then the claims made about certain diets about this is the perfect diet, that's the perfect diet. Meat causes this and fat causes that. And you look at how many times they're cross-sectional, longitudinal. I mean, they're just as vague as what they do for vaping. And it's very interesting to see that.
And there's some crossover there. American Heart Association is bad on both of these issues.
Yeah. And I lost 50 pounds and my cholesterol had never been better when I was on keto.
That's awesome.
I mean, so it's just funny. Yeah, even some other people I know a lot of people, we tend to be kind of big people in the smoking and vaping community. And so a lot of us, it's funny because I've seen a lot of people getting on keto and stuff also with, it's been kind of going around. It's like, oh, now I know this secret. What about the other secrets that nobody's telling me, or about the FDA is lying to me about, or whatever? So I guess we tend to be more conspiratory minded too because of that.
Skeptical, right? It's distrustful of authority, right? So it's not just blindly following authorities, which I think is very important because, even there are so many fad diets, and some of that, the government advice is based on a lot of just assumptions and science that's pretty shaky. But then you also have these fad diet people who are kind of, and a lot of this is like with vaping, like you said, where you have what works for people, and then you don't exactly know what the long-term effects might be of a diet like that. But we are also not computers who are like, oh, this is my program is keto, this is what I will do for the rest of my life. You could say, well, this worked for me, this helped me lose weight, and now I can exercise and do other things, and my cholesterol is great, and that's awesome, congratulations. But if like 10 years from now, something starts to go weird, maybe because your body has changed, that does happen, then you can adjust and find something different that works for you and your body at that point in your life. So it's this weird thing about governments. They love black and white. They love just blanket advice. This works for everybody, and it never does. There's never a one size fits all for anything.
Yeah, and if you look into how our food pyramid was created and the science that went into it, that was basically like, okay, we're going to ignore all the nutritionists. I believe this, and this is what Congress decided to make our food, and that fat was bad, and the whole thing with I forget what his name was. Somebody in the chat remind me of the guy who decided fat was horrible for us, that humans should not eat fat, fat is an essential macronutrient. Yeah. And he said we shouldn't eat fat. We should cut all that off. And just how government got involved in this and what the FDA does with that, and what the USDA, is that USDA? Is that
USDA, FDA? It's a combination. They both
how they say what we should eat and stuff. And then you look at that and you go, and we're supposed to believe what they tell us about vaping and all this other stuff. You see.
Yeah, I'm sure you're thinking of Ansel Keys.
He's
Minnesota. His life is fascinating. He is a fascinating
guy. Yeah,
really one of those early advocate researchers that at the time wasn't a thing. And I'm not as hard on Ansel Keys as other people are when they, in retrospect, I'm like, he was, saying that this nutrition is an early science now is true, but back then, what he was working with the best information he could. And to his credit, he actually did go into the field to study things. He wasn't just using a government database and trying to, mine it for the exact numbers that he wanted to find to prove. And he did, he had a hypothesis based on his observations. I think him using, he used rats a lot, mice.
He cherry picked certain
things. But partially that was because just the information that he had access to wasn't very good or complete. Yeah, but he was also one of those people who got a theory, thought he proved it to himself, and then he was blinded to anything else. And he was very, he was one of those early advocate researchers where he pushed and he he built relationships with people in government, and he convinced people.
Kind of reminds me of Stanton Glantz from the nutrition side.
Well, except that Ansel Keys was actually a real, scientist.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
like he was an actual scientist who did like field work and did his theories came from his observations, not the reverse. But once he, and this is a danger most scientists who are honest are aware of, is if you ever put out a theory, if you put out a hypothesis and you're making a case for that, you are now biased pretty much for the rest of your career. And you have to recognize that you were put on blinders to anything that would disprove this hypothesis you went out there and said, I believe in, because it's
even Einstein did that, and he had to be convinced he was wrong on a couple of different things. And yeah,
everybody does that because it's embarrassing and it's hard to admit when you're wrong. Although I'm a big proponent of this idea of rewarding people publicly for changing their minds, like when they have come to change their mind because they were, they looked at the evidence, they reinvestigated, and they said, oh, I was wrong. I think that's brave and should be rewarded, and isn't, because I want to incentivize people to be able to lower the bar to doing that.
Yeah, so they can give them the out, the path away from that, from having to be stuck. You think of like Scott Gottlieb. I think sometimes he did change his mind and stuff, but he just could not backpedal anymore. He just could not come out and say, yeah, I was wrong on this, and I know it's wrong. And you can kind of see sometimes when he tweets and stuff, and he says certain things, you're like, he gets it.
Yeah,
but he just won't go there. And I think that might have something to do with what you're saying, is this reluctance to.
Well, I think he got caught up in the bureau because and the new commissioner, Califf, he experienced this his first time around, where ostensibly he has the most powerful role in the FDA or in the agency, but he kind of got bullied by the career bureaucrats and got bullied into. Well, I mean, I say bullied. I don't know how it happened, but he backed down and he gave deference to career bureaucrats and made some very large mistakes by doing.
Oh, for that
drug, by proving the drug, and I think that might be what happened to Gottlieb while he was in there, is that, because he came in very fervently in support of harm reduction, specifically tobacco harm reduction, and then he backed away from it. And I think it was because he came into a scenario where there was career bureaucrats who had already decided against this, and they had things in the works already and couldn't step on those toes. But then when he left, and in retrospect, probably feels a little bit embarrassed that he didn't stick to his guns. Maybe that's what happened, but giving people a way out that's one of the things I think we need to figure out, if it's possible, if they're interested in it. Vital strategies, for example, should be given some way to get out of what they've been doing with tobacco, because now they're super interested in harm reduction when it comes to drugs and the opioid crisis. And they posted an op-ed in the New York Daily News after Guy Bentley called them out in the New York Daily News in his own op-ed, saying, this is hypocrisy. And for some reason, they felt compelled to respond to that without giving any credit to Guy Bentley's, without adding any attention onto what he wrote.
Of course not.
Oh, we're pro harm reduction, and that means what we've always been doing functionally. But if they are truly, if there are people at Vital Strategies who truly recognize the folly of their previous behavior, that would be wonderful. We aren't going to forget what they did. They don't get a pass. They don't get to be leaders of tobacco harm reduction, probably ever, but they should be. If they're truly interested, we should welcome them in and say, great, you can't pretend that you didn't do all of those things that you did, all of those people's lives that you affected in India and Thailand and wherever, the Philippines.
Yeah. And I mean, I was a big fan of that piece they put out in the New York Times. I mean, the more, I'm a massive proponent for drug harm reduction for people who use drugs, and seeing that is a big deal.
Yeah, it's huge.
It is a huge deal, but you're right. The hypocrisy there runs deep. And there's, our favorite billionaire backing them as well. But
yeah, that's so interesting that Bloomberg seems to be supportive of drugs harm reduction, which is, when I saw that come out, I was, first of all, I saw this earlier before the New York Times thing, and I was talking to people in the drug space saying, like, watch out, like if they're trying to take over, watch out. But it was way too late at that point. By the time I noticed it, that they were already, Vital Strategies was already giving out grants and forming alliances and coalitions and all this other stuff. But part of me was worried, but part of me was also like, this could be huge for drugs harm reduction because it's vital strategies. It's Bloomberg, that they have so much weight and so much money and so much influence, as we saw with that, being able to buy a full page ad in the New York Times costs a fortune. So it's like, yes, on this issue, that's wonderful, but it's so strange that Bloomberg is all in on this one side of harm reduction.
Get it.
And I mean, I think they get it, but what I imagine they're doing right now is trying to work on, I assume in the next year or two, we will see quite a number of research papers come out talking about why we should differentiate harm reduction between drugs and harm reduction with tobacco. Tobacco is a totally different space. I'm sure we'll see a lot of that discussion.
I have a question. No. I have a question specifically about this, and it was because of the things that I think you noted in your article here about that expanding of the agency's authorities. And so I am one of these weird people who can imagine a world, perhaps not in our lifetime, but imagine a world where all drugs, yes, all the drugs are sold on a regulated marketplace. We have assurances of safe supply and product quality and so on. Age restricted this, we can get into marketing restrictions, all the nuances, fine. But all drugs being regulated and sold on a marketplace. And my first thought was, would something like giving FDA authority over all of those things appease them to some extent? And then it gets into the sort of, if not FDA, what agency would be appropriate to do this? Do we need to make another agency? And then, of course, the other question is, I guess as we go through, like right now, so we're going to get to a point where cannabis is federally regulated. We will likely see that in our lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've, of course, had our opinions about whether or not anybody wants FDA to do that. But, it is, I'm not totally sure what my question is, but I mean, is the expectation that even within FDA, let's just say it all ends up there, are all of these, I'm answering my own question in my head, but is it really necessary? Is it even efficient? It's not efficient to have these drugs siloed off in different centers.
Only if you want the pharmaceutical companies to be the only people. I mean, I think it should be treated like foods and alcohol. So what you have is, with food, the FDA obviously got into the game of regulating food when food already existed. So what they did was they said, if this ingredient has been part of consumption, the patterns of consumption for 100 years without any known problems, it's just functionally grandfathered in. It's considered GRAS, so generally recognized as safe. And so if you introduce something new, like let's say you've created some weird new fat in a lab, like a trans fat or something like that to replace butter, then you're going to have to come to the FDA and prove to us that it's safe within certain reasonable limits, and then we'll say it's okay or not. Huh?
What was that, Olea or Oleine?
Yes, that Olestra. Yeah, Olestra.
That stuff that gave everybody
diarrhea.
Diarrhea. I was trying to think of a nice word to say, but yeah, diarrhea works.
It's a shame that never really took off, because there were so many jokes about that, because it really was a fascinating and really groundbreaking invention. But no, so and with alcohol as well, there's certain things people put in alcohol, or like there was a controversy a couple years ago with the alcohol caffeine combination that FDA decided to ban, and I think that was a poor scientific decision, but it was FDA's decision. So when it comes to drugs, and when I think it comes to vaping, the much more reasonable, if you want to have, like, look at food, there's such a wide variety of food, and it's wonderful, and it's safe. We have a very safe food system for the most part. People usually, except for here or there are foodborne illnesses, some kind of weird bacteria gets into the system. And let me tell you, FDA regulation doesn't do anything about that. The only thing they can do is track it and figure out where it's coming from, which is great, and then inform the public what not to eat at this moment, which is also great, and that's what they should do. But with vaping and drugs and stuff like this, it would be a much more appropriate and cost-effective means of regulating the industry, of saying these are the safe ingredients, like these are the known ingredients that we know could be added to these products. Here are the limits that we've decided are safe. If you want to add something new and weird in there, you're going to have to come to us and show us that it is safe. And then we will say, okay, we're adding this to the list of standards of safe things that you can put into these products. And then you have an agency like TTB, which is part of formerly ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So what TTB primarily does in the alcohol market is people have labels for their beer or whatever, and all of the ingredients that are safe for beer or wine or liquor are known. And they just go to TTB and they say, look, we have a new product. We just need a new label. Can you approve it? And TTB, within literally 2 weeks, at most maybe 2 months, will say, yeah, sure, go, good for it. And they do this like hundreds of thousands of times a year. They're very good at it.
Wow.
Because there's already the system in place. There isn't anything too wild or new happening in this space. So, Representative Mace, who's a Republican from, I can't remember which state, she introduced a bill in Congress to legalize cannabis, very similar to some that Democrats have been introducing, expunge records, remove from the schedule, all of this stuff. One of the interesting things that she did was she handed the primary regulatory authority over cannabis products, the ones that would be sold over state lines, to TTB, which I said, that is a very novel idea, and I think a very good one, because as we have seen with vaping, the FDA cannot handle, they do not have the resources to handle this. I think at the moment, you can't just right now say, TTB, you do it, because they would run into the same problem if they were trying to do scientific studies and have panels figure out what's safe. It should be up to FDA to simply look at the ingredients, the possible range of ingredients, set standards, and then hand it to another agency to deal with the day-to-day applications, because FDA cannot and should not be engaged in that level of interaction with the industry. They just don't have the capacity to do it.
Would a move like that, we've all talked about standards-based regulations would really be the way to go here. And so I imagine, though, that puts FDA in conflict with the Tobacco Control Act. Do they even have the authority to sort of reassign it to another agency?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they would have to. So because, Tobacco Control Act gives the FDA regulatory authority over tobacco products, but and maybe someone correct me after the fact or later if I'm wrong, but I think there would be no problem with FDA saying, this is how these products will be regulated. And then we are going to now promulgate a rule. They would sort of be handing off some authority, transferring authority to another agency. So that might run into problems. They might actually need Congress to intervene. But I would say, I'm not because TTB is part of ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms. I'm pretty sure there is already some sort of regulatory structure there for FDA to hand off some authority for tobacco products to TTB. I'm not sure, maybe not TTB or another agency within ATF. Not sure, but that's an interesting question, because if that would require congressional authority, we should start working on that right now.
My question on that, though, is that they seem to have a zero tolerance on any of the ingredients at this point. Nothing is 100% safe, and we don't know if you can inhale. Of course, nobody's trying to find that out. I mean, all they're trying to do is nitpick every little, and that's the problem, is they're nitpicking every little thing that they can find in it for being safe for people who have never smoked. And are worried that somebody who's never smoked will pick these up and have this teeny tiny risk, like you said, that teeny tiny risk. And then that outweighs all of the reduction in risk for the smokers. But by the same token, they completely ignore that person who has never smoked and picked up that vape, if they didn't have the vape, would likely have picked up a cigarette, but they don't take any of that into account.
It's hard. The standards that have been applied to vapor products and to a lesser degree other tobacco products, other novel tobacco products, they are higher. It's a higher bar than even for pharmaceuticals, right? Most pharmaceuticals don't have 3, 4, 5 year long trials. They have 6-month trials, 2-month trials, 1-month trials. And then what happens is, the FDA says, well, you've studied it in healthy people. You've studied it in people who aren't healthy. We haven't really seen anything too bad. Now we're going to let you sell it, but we're going to watch later on to see how everything goes. And then if something goes wrong, maybe we'll pull it off the market. I don't understand why. I mean, I have my theories about why FDA wouldn't do that for vapor products, is because they don't want to approve them. And this is one of the reasons that even if they had the authority, they would never transfer power. They would never do the standards-based regulation and transfer the monitoring power over to TTB, because they don't want to give that up, because they don't really want this to be a market that exists. They want to kill it as much as possible. Although I think at this point they've been well and truly painted into a corner. And they've been forced to approve some products, which is the end. It's the end. It's over. In my mind, it's not over. Obviously, there's a lot more to fight and a lot more to do. But with the products that have been approved already, that there will be consumers consuming legal products that the FDA has been forced to declare are for the protection of public health. The arguments are now over that there is no form of safe tobacco. There's no form of safe consumer nicotine except for things made by pharmaceutical companies. It's done, and the FDA is going at this point. It would be far too embarrassing when someone says, if you have said these vapor products are for the protection of public health, here are this million other products that are newer and better and safer. You kind of have to now give them the same consideration and approval.
Yeah, that's true.
But the kids, Michelle.
Oh, those kids, those angelic kids who've never done anything wrong in their lives until Big Bad Vapor came along.
Yeah, they and would have never done anything wrong ever if it wasn't for unicorn poop e-liquid.
I just whenever I hear people like at the campaign for tobacco for kids or PAVE mommies talking and all this, I'm like, am I the only person who still fully remembers what I was like as a kid, like how I thought and what I wanted to? A decade before I ever smoked, I knew I wanted to smoke. When I was a 13-year-old, I was like, I want to do that. And I even looked up, are there safer ways to do this before I smoked? I was like, what is a safer form of this? And I looked into, was it American Spirits? Because they were being sold as more natural. And I'm like, oh, that's bullshit. I was like, oh, it's bullshit. They're all basically the same risk. So I said, pardon my French, but, F it. And then I started smoking. But I actually did look to see if there was a safer form of this thing that I already knew I wanted to do.
Now, what year was that?
It's been around 2002, 2003, maybe a little later.
So, and what's funny is during that time period, you didn't have a whole lot of flavored cigarettes. I think those started coming out maybe in 2004, 2005. You started seeing those come out.
The flavored cigarettes.
The Camel Smooths and the clove cigarettes were really big.
That was before I was, I think, because that was the early 90s. And that was kind of a flash in the pan because they had it. And then within 5 years, they were gone.
Yeah, and I remember because I used to try the Camel Smooths they didn't come out until maybe it might have been just before you started smoking, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. But the thing is that when I started, which was in the 80s, they did not exist.
Yeah, no.
So the whole idea to me that flavors are what get kids, and I did not smoke menthol either. So this whole idea that it's menthol and it's flavors and it's Joe Camel and now it's Netflix, because now they're going after Netflix because apparently we all started doing drugs because we were Netflix and chill. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And they've come up with all these crazy ideas for why. And I think I even tweeted it, in our tweet for CASAA, I even said, teens use drugs and alcohol because they're anxious, they're stressed, they're depressed, they have, they're being abused. They have all these, their family does it, but it's not happening in a vacuum. And of all those reasons why kids say that they smoke and do drugs and drink alcohol, the government wants to stop Netflix from showing people vaping. It's
so silly. Kids want to do drugs because not there's all of the reasons that you mentioned, of course. It can be self-soothing, but also it is a small measure of control. I see this all the time and people do it with food too, is the less control someone feels like they have over their life, the more they will try and exercise it in these weird ways over their own body. And so what I remember seeing those stories about
piercing
doors being taken off, the stall doors and bathrooms being taken off because of vaping. I'm like, that is literally the worst thing you could do because those kids are instantly going to leave school and start smoking or vaping because they feel the small amount of freedom that they have as young people who are craving more and more autonomy being further restricted. They are going to lash out by the one thing they truly have control over that no one can monitor 100% of the day is what they put into their body, what they do with their body. So that's where they're going to have that rebellion. And
I think I included rebel in that list actually.
It's just
when I was doing that
autonomy seeking, and when it's your body is really one of the last bastions of it when everything else in your life is
the one thing you control. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I even I mean, that's true even for adults, of course.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And one of the earlier instances where I kind of realized some of this was watching people cross the street. Full grown ass men just taking their damn time. The lights turned. We're all waiting.
Yeah.
But this guy, perfectly healthy, just
sauntering
off the street.
across.
And I thought, yeah, he's taking it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the control he has over his world right now. And, I'm here for it. I mean, it sucks being late, but, fine.
But that whole idea that they're going to substitute something else, if you take off that door and stuff, I've often thought that as we've watched smoking rates go down over the last few decades, we've watched obesity rates go up, and other kind of drug use go up. And they think we live in this vacuum that if you just quit smoking, your life would be just perfect, and and they're literally doing this in their truth in their ads about their depression stick thing, saying it's the nicotine that's making you feel this way, so just stop.
Oh, your ADHD will go away, your depression will go away, the fact that your parents are abusive will totally go away. You'll be just fine if you it's honestly sad. I really feel for young people at this point. I felt it when I was young, because it was right after Columbine and 9/11, and I was like, I already felt like I had so little freedom, and now it's all being taken away. And now I look at the kids growing up, and I'm like, good God, I can't imagine how they must feel, like how controlled. And now the pandemic, I'm shocked when the CDC or NIH put out the inter-pandemic drug numbers, because I would have expected kids to be what I feel like I would have been doing, which is busting out of the house, going into the woods, drinking, partying, doing whatever, because you would feel so claustrophobic with I cannot imagine just being with my parents for 2 years.
And they could have been doing that and just not admitting it, because if you listen to our Twitter space with Dr. Madhu, we had this weird stat in the last teen thing talking about how all of them how many were using the heat not burn, Alex?
It's like over 300,000 or something like that.
It's an impossible number.
So clearly these kids were just like, yeah, whatever.
I would love to see, this is what I would love to see a study on, because, when we do surveys in research, they're usually validated in some way. We're like, this is the standard, this is how we do it. And this is how we know approximately how many people are honest and answering the questions, to the best of their ability. But those validation studies are used for decades. And okay, so those were done. These surveys were designed pre-internet, when kids didn't pay attention to news stories about what kids' drug using behaviors were. So now we have, these kids are on Twitter, they're on Snapchat, they're on, TikTok, and they're looking at these news stories about their vaping, their drinking, their cannabis use. And I wonder if that's legitimately having an effect on how they answer or choose not to answer these survey questions. I have no idea what the answer is.
I've had teens. My teenage daughter told me that at least half the people in her school were gay. So, I mean, but because she's on Twitter and it's a lot more, and she was convinced of this, and it's sort of, I remember being a teenager myself and telling Mom, everybody's going on this trip to Florida. Everybody is, or everybody's got their own car. Teens, they just, and then you've got the Truth Initiative and Flavor Hooks Kids and all that, putting all these ads out saying your friends are all vaping in the bathroom and there's these great flavors that teens all love. I mean, they're the biggest advertiser to teens of anybody. Did you see that I think I tweeted about it, the main communications director for Flavor Hooks Kids Maine came out and said, because they're trying to do a flavor ban, and he just came out with this whole thing about how flavors all make kids vape, and that I feel bad for smokers, but they should just quit.
Oh, that's lovely. Very great advice. Why didn't we think of that? Oh my God, all these years.
I mean, it's always confused me that when it comes to teens, it's this horrible lifelong addiction that's going to affect them for their lives, and they're never going to get over it. And for adults, well, you should just quit.
I truly can't wait. We're about 5 years away now from the kids. So, because the vaping panic has been going on, I guess, since 2015-ish. We're a few years away from the kids who were in middle school when it first started, the panic, being in their 20s. And I cannot wait to hear from them about how they feel. Because I remember when I was in college, thinking back on my DARE days, my days in the DARE program, and being like, what a crock of shit that was. Okay.
Right.
So, I mean, that just informed me about a whole world of drugs. I didn't know what peace
Right.
was.
Everybody says that.
I didn't know I'd never heard the phrase angel dust before the cop came in with a little chart filled with drugs to show you exactly what they look like. So I cannot wait to hear from these kids who are now who are going to be adults very soon, looking back on the truth and the campaign for tobacco-free kids stuff. We're already seeing some of it. I see some kids on YouTube laughing at the Truth Initiative and the campaign for tobacco-free kids advertisements. But yeah, I can't wait to see what they think about it. Just being like, yeah, I totally did vape when I was in middle school and high school. I hit that jewel all the time. I was jeweling up and down, and then I just didn't. And I'm not addicted. I'm not addicted to nicotine, and I don't smoke. So we see that in the rates of the 18 and 24-year-olds right now who were in high school, 4 years ago, and those rates just plummet. So clearly all this vaping when they were in high school didn't create a new addition, a new generation of addicts. It's a fad. It's a fad. And when they go to college and they have no money, it'll end. Like, they can't afford Juuls anymore or whatever, pop bars. They'll be like, I think maybe now that I'm 21, I'll probably just try drinking for a while and smoking weed. And then they'll be like, because I've noticed this happening in DC. Weed is decriminalized. It isn't technically legal because the federal government keeps preventing the government from using its money to regulate cannabis. So we have gift shops. You buy good wishes or a poem, and then you for $200, $300, then you put weed as a gift. But so I've noticed this, that people who start using cannabis, or when they're using cannabis, won't drink so much or won't vape so much or won't smoke so much, whatever it is they're doing. So it's substitution. So I imagine a lot of the youth vapors, as soon as they hit 21, are be like, oh yeah, I can actually get high and I can actually get drunk now. I don't need this other thing that I was using, this like much more milder form of chemical shift. I can actually have a way better one now. So forget vaping.
What's funny,
it's funny too, like one of the things with Truth you don't see much of anymore that I saw for a while they were running these campaigns where they were interviewing like students, high schoolers or freshmen in college or whatever about vaping, and they would tell their stories. I couldn't get out of bed without vaping, without hitting my Juul. I couldn't do anything without I was hitting it all day in class. And then, at the end of their interview, they're like, so I finally just stopped.
Yeah, amazing.
I just quit.
And I think at some point, Truth was like, maybe we're sending the wrong message, because they just kind of stopped that campaign of these interviewing these kids who all just miraculously quit, because they were kind of shooting themselves in the foot. On one hand, they're saying this is the most addictive chemical in the world, the entire generation hooked. But then the other time, they're actually showing on TV all these kids who they just stopped.
Yeah.
I
saw in the chat someone asked about federal cannabis legalization. It just last week the House passed a bill called the MORE Act, and that had already been passed. It's probably not going to go anywhere in the Senate. This is what happened before. The last time, I think it was 2020, it was passed in the House, or 2021, and it got more votes from Republicans then than it did this time around. It's overloaded with, very well-meaning stuff, right? So it's got the decriminalize at the federal level, expunge records, but it has also like a very large tax rate of 5% going up to 8% after 3 years, and it has programs for small minority-owned businesses, all this like stuff that a lot of people who are on the left side of politics love, but the people who are on the right side hate. And so it is so overloaded with the stuff that Republicans hate that they can't vote for it. They feel like they can't vote for it because it's too much pork and all this other stuff. Even though a decent number of Republicans now want to decriminalize cannabis and want to expunge records, which is awesome. But so Democrats really need to just introduce a bill that does that. Instead of
padding it with stuff.
Get that in, get it done, and then build on it from there.
But they don't want to do that because then, this is kind of a conspiracy theory, but I think that Democrats don't want this issue to go away for them because it is such a voter turnout thing. And
that's a good point.
They are the ones who want to legalize cannabis. So this is why we need to take Senate. This is why we need to take the House and the White House. We need to have full control. Then we will give you cannabis. But I also think they truly do want to have all of that all of the stuff, all the things for minority-owned businesses and people who've been harmed by the war on drugs. They really truly do want that. And they worry that if they just pass a cleaner bill, a decrim bill, and an records expungement bill, they'll never get that other stuff in a standalone kind of way. So it's a little bit of both, I think, but it's just, unless something happens to this country and a lot more people become Democrats, I just don't think they're going to get everything they want in this one bill. And in the meantime, there are people still going to jail. There are people still, having their armored trucks robbed by sheriffs from legal cannabis businesses. So like all of this is still happening in the meantime.
Yeah.
You said the FDA doesn't, it doesn't, in your article, you were talking about how, I don't know what you put it, like they essentially don't want to look bad. They don't want to, right? But don't they stop and think that if they're hiding all this stuff, it's going to eventually come out and they're going to look really bad, because I mean, eventually smoking, if they succeed in completely destroying this industry and pushing people, not letting people vape, nicotine, eventually people are just going to go back to smoking and it's going to come out in the numbers. I mean, I just don't understand why. Are they still? And also, did you happen to come across, I forget what his name was, David Graham, I think it was. He was a whistleblower with the FDA at one point. I think back in 2005 or something. He's the one who came out and said that he was told by one of his superiors that the FDA was in a collaborative relationship with the industry and that they'll find a reason to approve a drug no matter what they can, and that the consumers, the citizens of America aren't their client, the industry is their client. Do you remember that line?
They're the ones who pay the user fees, and tobacco user fees make up a significant portion at this point of the FDA's budget, in addition to what they get from the government. But what was the first question you asked about? FDA not wanting to look bad, and right. Yeah, I think most of the commissioners, well, the thing is, the commissioners, if they make FDA look good and they make the president look good and they make Congress look good, they usually take on, either they go to the pharmaceutical industry or they're in politics back and forth in different agencies and NIH and all this other stuff. And by the time it comes out, by the time we get the numbers and see like, well, that was a mistake. Frankly, there's a lot of researchers saying, well, this other stuff happened, and so it wasn't all FDA's fault, and FDA didn't know X, Y, or Z. But also by that point, there'll be plenty of pharmaceutical companies who have their own vapes. There'll be the Hale or whatever owned by a few people, or there'll be some completely new technology and new thing to worry about, and no one will even ever go back and worry about it. Yeah. There's very little culpability or accountability for that kind of stuff after the fact, because FDA is very good at making itself look good, and everybody wants FDA to look good because it makes everybody's job easier. I mean, for heaven's sake, we have people now going back and relitigating alcohol prohibition and saying, well, it actually totally worked. Everyone says it was such a failure, but it totally worked in reducing alcohol consumption. Like,
right. Well, yeah. It's like looking at Massachusetts and how it reduced their flavor ban, reduced sales of flavored vapor products. Well, duh.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts,
duh. It reduced all the legal sales. Yes, the sales on paper is what it reduced.
I love it whenever I saw that study. I laughed so hard when I saw it. I was like, yeah, it totally worked in reducing legal sales of flavored vapor. And you're like, yeah, duh. Of course. Yeah.
And actually, Alex, if you could pull up that one part in that Reason article, Michelle, this article is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Reason, by the
Both
way,
of them are.
Obviously, everything you write is fantastic. We're just blanket statement.
Thank you.
It's fantastic, but this one paragraph really struck me because it just sums up so much.
This is the
what was
it's in the how to fix it section. Keep going. I don't know. My Chrome didn't want to share anything, so Alex is acting here for me.
14 years after leaving the FDA. Was that it?
That kind of prefaces it. 14 years after leaving the FDA, Williams looked into seafood-related illnesses to see how the rule had been performed.
That's crazy.
See how it performed. He found that the cases of this had not halved as the agency predicted. They had doubled. But this paragraph right here that you wrote, I read this and I was like, vocally, I was like, yes, Michelle. The cost of this fell entirely on consumers and small businesses, while no one at the agency paid for its mistake. Not the economists forced to produce erroneous cost and benefit estimates, not their bosses who compelled them to make analysis supporting predetermined policy agenda, not the commissioner who set that agenda, and not the politicians supposedly responsible for holding agencies accountable. There's no accountability It's us that pays the price.
Yes.
Every time.
Us. Yeah. That's
like
such a
it's whatever the next thing is that moves on. It'll take the, that'll be the big concern, and we'll just move on. We'll forget there's no accountability. We move past it. We carry on. But the people are the ones left behind, dealing with that wreckage, dealing with bad policies, dealing with things, bans, poor regulations, whatever the case may be. And that right there, like, struck a chord in me. And I was like, I was reading this in the car. I had just come back from Buffalo, and I was like, yes, Michelle, yes.
Yeah, even when they do get hauled into Congress. So sometimes Congress will be forced, because there's something particularly embarrassing. Congress will be forced to bring in the commissioner for questioning, at a hearing or something like that. Even when that happens, that retrospective, FDA already got what it wanted. In the case of the seafood rule, what they wanted it was a fight between them and USDA. USDA was talking about instituting rules, and the FDA wanted that power. They didn't want USDA to step on their territory, so they just put out something that they knew wasn't going to do anything, just so that they had the power over that part of the industry. And I think the same is true with tobacco. Commissioner Kessler didn't know what they wanted to do. He just knew that they wanted to have power over the industry. And so, the rules we're dealing with now, that vapor companies, an entirely different technology, are dealing with now, were set by people who knew that they had no idea what they were doing. They didn't know what they wanted to accomplish.
With tobacco. They had no idea what they're doing with tobacco, let alone.
And
now they've copied and pasted that onto a completely different product that is used differently, that has different purposes. So yeah, it's even when someone is kind of held accountable by Congress, they're not really. They got exactly what they wanted already. The game is over. Even if they have to, hold their nose and talk to members of Congress in a public forum, nothing happens. All those businesses were already destroyed. Although I will say, after reading that book, Richard Williams' book, I will never eat raw oysters ever again.
I never could. It's never. We do have a question here from the chat. Damian Sweeney asks, I'd love to know why the most fervent opposition to tobacco harm reduction comes from politicians with a left-leaning ethos, but the same politicians almost always support drug harm reduction.
Yeah, it's a very simple answer, because it's big tobacco, right? It's tobacco. And this, we are already starting to see this in the cannabis conversation, right? So there's a big fear about the Amazonification of cannabis, right? So it is a big business. Big tobacco is like functionally big oil. It is one of the biggest bads that left-leaning politicians can very easily point to say, I'm fighting that. I'm fighting that on behalf of you, the consumers. I'm good. Love me. So that's all it is. It's just they are pitching this as a very black and white, big tobacco versus consumers. This is a ploy by big tobacco. It's not helpful. It's not harm reduction. And, the public who aren't smokers, don't know smokers, don't really care about vaping all that much. They see the headlines and say, yeah, it's a big tobacco plot. Fine. Yeah, it makes sense that my politician that I like is fighting big tobacco. Good for them. It's a very easy win for politicians to say, I'm fighting big tobacco, because everybody hates big tobacco.
When you said that, I actually pictured this guy, this politician, picturing himself, hands on hips, cape flowing in the wind.
We've seen this multiple times over the last years. We've seen them sit up there, on their dais and say like, "Oh, you're just a big tobacco, and we got to look out for the vulnerable people. That's what we're doing." And you're like, "Yeah, you first of all have no idea. You don't even know how to pronounce formaldehyde, so you have no idea what you're talking about." But it's clearly just, and unfortunately, it's politics. That's what politics is. It's very performative. It's very much about getting yourself at the front of the hearing so that your constituents and potential voters see you doing stuff, and they think they like what you're doing, what they think you're doing. That's pretty much what it is. And it doesn't really matter to the politicians or most of their voters what actually was done, like what actually happened. They just see my senator or my representative seems to be powerful. They seem to be doing things that I like. I'll keep voting for them. And that's just how the political game operates, which is why it's really important for, it's important for the public, and really, really important. What we're missing right now is the journalism space. We're starting to get it more with Filter and with Slate, and a few other outlets are starting to cover this. But what has happened in journalism has been so devastating to politics, because it is their job to hold them accountable and say, all that stuff you said was not true. It didn't actually. But what we have now is we have journalists who are receiving press releases from FDA or attending, pre-publication meetings with FDA, and FDA saying, you will only get to print this. You do not get to check this with anybody. And they're doing it, shockingly. They're actually doing it because they want to get out there first. They don't want to be left out of the meeting. They want to be with the cool kids.
Yeah. Like closing that nicotine loophole. that nicotine loophole they had to close. Every with the synthetic nicotine that you wrote about in the other article, which I just dropped in the chat, every single media except for like you or Filter or the Jacobs, they all said, they just passed it on. Yeah, this is a horrible loophole and we need to close it, and that was it.
Yeah, no, and that's the great racket, is that they create problems and then they solve problems with more legislation. They created the synthetic nicotine problem, which is what I said, because the industry didn't see a viable pathway to do it legally, right? And this is always what happens when you're in the lead up towards prohibition, is that everyone will try and comply as much as they can with the rules, because most people don't want to break the rules. But when it becomes impossible to comply with those rules and keep doing what you want, in some form or another, that's when you start going outside of the rules. So, the rules on the vapor industry right now, they've signaled that there is no real pathway. You can put millions of dollars into your applications. You can wait for years, and it is just going to be a rubber stamped denial. So they're saying, well, why bother? Why waste that time and money? And we'll just try and find a loophole if we can for now, knowing that it will be closed eventually. But the idea that there was just this loophole that they didn't think of and had to be closed, it wouldn't have been a loophole anybody would have ever used if there was a way for companies to affordably and reasonably get their products to market legally.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
so frustrating.
To kind of just piggyback off of Damien's comment question, I think too, with a lot of folks on the left, there's very much the social justice movement when it comes to drug harm reduction and people who use drugs and people affected by the war on drugs. But when you look at that same social justice movement around tobacco, it's like flipped. Mm-hmm. It's we're all victims. We've all been the marketing of tobacco companies has tricked our youth and has tricked all of us into these horrible things. And so you instead can't point. There is no big cocaine to go tackle down. I mean, there is, but it's not a legal viable entity that you can drag into Congress or anything like that. So instead, we're kind of left with this, just like we're all victims, and so we have to tackle the big tobacco companies instead of creating better legislation, creating these routes for legalization and marketplace and really making change there. It just falls back to, well, you're all victims and we're going to take on the big tobacco companies. And like, that's the solution. And it's such a divergence in this whole world of social justice. And it's just kind of mind boggling.
Yeah. I mean, I think the opioids is one of the really interesting parallels here, because you do have a kind of big bad, which is pharmaceutical companies in a lot of ways. Yeah. And you have that, but the conversation about the opioid users, and I remember seeing, it was a New York Times headline a couple of years back where it was like, and all of the pictures used of the opioid users were white people, which I found to be very interesting. Like, we need a gentler war on drugs for opioids. And I was like, that's interesting. Why do we need a gentler war now? Where was this gentler war with crack cocaine? That I cannot believe we are still a clear dog whistle, like a racist dog whistle. We're still talking about crack pipes today. I can't believe it. But
oh my gosh, how many? I will tell you right now, I saw a lot of true colors fly.
Oh yeah, me too.
During the whole clean pipe discourse,
even with vapors, yeah.
I was really blown away. Yeah, it was really. I just couldn't believe people unconsciously or just without thinking about it were talking in these terms today. I was like, you don't recognize what you're doing and how that might be seen as a throwback to the 80s. It's wild. But I just think, like, with opioids, you had the pharmaceutical companies literally being dragged into court for supposedly, they're being used as the big bad for the opioid epidemic. But at the same time, we're not just looking at opioid users as victims, but we are treating them as people and talking about harm reduction and giving them, safer substitutes and clean, safe spaces to inject and all this other stuff. It's a lot different than when you look at people who use nicotine or tobacco, where you're saying, like, well, at once you're a victim, but also screw you. You're a lost cause. We don't care about you.
And you bother us.
You only care about kids. Yeah.
You put stuff in our space. Well, I was watching, I forget what, some show, can't remember, I think it was Manifest, like last year. And some of the bad guys one season were people they just referred to as the meth heads.
Yeah.
The meth heads. And I was just like, do they not understand?
Was that an NBC show?
Possibly. I don't know. ABC.
Sounds like
CBS.
an NBC show.
I don't know. I don't remember, but it's not the first time I've seen that, because I just saw something the other day too where they were referring to crackheads.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and writers are always looking for ways to very efficiently code someone as good or bad, and I get that, right?
Yeah.
Because you only have so much time, and you can't follow the bad guy around for a whole episode or whatever. I mean, you can if it's a well-written show, but you got to code them really quickly. So drug user, something like that, dirty
throw
person.
vape in their hand, they're a douche.
Well, that's the new thing, which is really interesting to me that I keep seeing. I watched a movie. I think it was Cronenberg's son directed a film, and it was a very interesting movie. I can't remember what it's called now. But the main character, there were characters in the movie, and there was so much vaping in the movie. And I was like, turned to my husband, I'm like, this is wild. You almost never see vaping anywhere. And then I slowly realized that none of the characters who were vaping were particularly good people. And I was like, oh, I get it now. Okay.
They must be bad people,
Yeah, and like the only people you see ever smoking in any kind of TV show now are either the bad guys or like the guy who's been doing whatever he's doing for way too long. He's like the sheriff of the town who just doesn't, he's been doing this way too. He's kind of a little good, a little bad. He's a little grizzled. Like those are the only people
like
now.
douchey yuppie type. Like the only time recently I've seen it where it wasn't that, although I think originally it was intended this way, but the character was so good that it ended up not being this way, was in a sitcom called Catastrophe. There was one of the main characters who played like kind of a rich guy, was vaping throughout the beginning of the show. And I would have to go back to look and see if they cooled it on his vaping as he became like a much more interesting and a very good, like a good person. It became clear that he was one of the best people on the show, like not an a-hole.
Isn't there one where it's a female actress, normally a movie actress, and I think she plays a deputy or something?
She plays the mayor. Yeah, she plays the Philadelphia mayor. There was some interesting writing about the fact that she was vaping, because she just did it. It wasn't like nobody remarked upon it. She wasn't a bad person. I mean, she was a flawed person, but in a lot of cases, because of these tobacco control people, you can't smoke or anything. And a lot of, that's what they're trying to do with Netflix right now. And so vaping kind of became sort of a substitute. I think what was happening there, and so I think this actually represents an interesting change, because prior to that, vaping was coded as like a rich person douchey thing. And I think what they were trying to signal with her vaping was her, working class, look at this Philadelphia working class type of mayor, her very like down to earthiness. They couldn't have her smoking, so they had her vaping. And like, that would be an interesting shift, to have it be more, have vaping in media coded as a working class thing, which would frankly be really good, because a lot of the smokers are people who are lower income. And, as somebody from the Philadelphia area, there's still a lot of smoking. So for them to
5%, right?
To see that, to have people like that, people who are from that area, and people who don't smoke or anything like that, seeing it this way as it is the people who used to be smokers, the people who would be smokers who are now doing this, that being a good thing, that would be a good thing. I think a shift.
Well, I think it's the second season of True Detective on, this is HBO, so not everybody, has access to it, but the main character, the woman who plays the detective, there is this progression at the beginning of the series. She's smoking. I think she smokes throughout most of it. Yeah. And then as she comes to a point of there's something about her character that changes. She gets a little softer, a bit more enlightened, has obviously a more expanded worldview, and in that transition she's vaping. So the series actually shows the progression. They use it as sort of a tool to illustrate good.
That's amazing. I wonder if that was something like the writer I know is. I wonder if. So I usually, when I see that stuff or I hear someone talking about it, I'm like, you must be a vapor, or know
somebody.
Someone switch from smoking, and you don't want to get on Twitter, like some certain movie directors, and talk about how horrible it is or how good it is, but you kind of want to put it in there in your piece of art, which I think is fascinating. I'm gonna have to watch the second season now.
I'm pretty sure that's the one. It's kind of the weird. The first one was really good. The second one was like okay, I'm going to watch all of this because I like the first one.
My husband really liked the second one because he said the same thing that everyone said the second one wasn't good, but he really, really enjoyed the second season. He said it was different, but he liked it.
But I think that's one of those things, and I think we're getting on an hour and a half now, but maybe this might lead into a wrap up for you as far as the more that we got people to vape over the last 10 years, the more that we were tried to struggle, people just kind of kept holding on. I mean, we've had apocalypses for vaping like 4 times now that this is it, this is the end, and people would panic. And we just keep holding on. Some people would just keep doing it. And we slowly have built up that we wanted to get to a point where everybody knew somebody who vaped, so that would be that kind of attitude that people are like, wait, I know we're saying this, but it helped me quit. It helped my mom quit. It helped my kid quit or whatever. And it gets out into the media and stuff. And hopefully, and because a lot of that media is a little more left leaning, hopefully that will influence that. And I guess that's going to lead to my question, unless Logan or Alex have something else they wanted to ask. But what do you see happening now? What do you see what's going to go on with the FDA? Are they ever going to authorize a flavored non-tobacco, non-menthol flavor? Do you think? Are they going to keep working on trying to just destroy the industry? Is somebody reasonable going to get in there? Did Cahill, right, Commissioner? Caliph, did he learn his lesson from the shellfish? So kind of wrap it up. Maybe what do you think of with do you guys think that's an okay question to sort of wrap it up on, and what she thinks of future with the FDA is, or do you have another question?
I want to add to that because I think it's a good practice for us to get into. We do a lot of bitching and complaining, but it's really good to start proposing some solutions here. And so that's really where I'm going with this. In addition to what Kristen's asking here is, in a way, I'm just sort of glancing at the conclusion of your article here.
Right, that's what I was.
We're sort of maybe putting a lot of this on the shoulders of the FDA commissioner, but there is that need to encourage people from within the agency to be the whistleblowers.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I understand, we have whistleblower protection laws in the United States, we don't.
We do, but it's not enough.
Not that great. So is there anything we as the public can do to give these people a safe place to go, amplify their voices, make sure they're protected?
Yeah, I mean, protected, there's really, I think whistleblowing, honestly, a lot of the time it's very self-motivated in that, like, someone's just pissed off enough. Someone is done, right? You kind of think about it when you're finally ready to quit a job that you formerly loved. It's like you've just had it and you kind of want to hurt your employer. You kind of be like, screw you, I'm done with this. So, I mean, it's hard to encourage whistleblowing because with the FDA, it seems to be such, and any of the federal agencies, it's such a career. It is such a lifelong, clubby, if you play the game right, you'll be set for life with friends, with jobs, with whatever. You'll feel good, you'll look good, and you'll get paid well. Whether you're at that agency or another, you'll always have friends. If you turn your back on that, you are ostracized. Like, in the truest sense of the word, you are locked out of your community. It's like being an ex-Mormon, right? You don't get to talk to your friends anymore. Those contacts are gone. All of your support networks for your career are gone. So it's a really difficult decision. I think part of it would have to come from the government in terms of encouraging whistleblowing and saying that you will be, 1, protected, and you'll be 2, rewarded. And I think the public and the media also needs, that's where we can really help, is in the rewarding and in the encouraging, and be like, whistleblowers, usually the first thing that happens is, a campaign to malign their person, to say, like, the only reason you're blowing the whistle is because X, Y, or Z, you're just out to get somebody or whatever. But, like, one of the things that I've been talking about for years is having an award for people, for researchers or, members of government or whatever, who change their mind, who say I was wrong, whatever it was. This sort of like, you recognize reality and did a hard thing by publicly saying you were wrong. You should be rewarded somehow, if not with money, with credit from the public. Will FDA ever approve a flavored vapor product? I think absolutely they have to. They will be forced to. It won't start right away. They'll just try and do tobacco. They'll maybe do some menthol after that. But as the black market, as the illicit market for these products continues to persist and exist and grow, they will be forced to do that. Especially, maybe they'll try and do it with prescription only for flavors or for certain nicotine levels, or it'll be just the pharmaceutical grade ones like Hale, the ones owned by pharmaceutical companies. But eventually they will be forced to approve them just because there's no way to stop this technology. It's too easy. There are too many people who know it. There are too many people doing it, and it's too easy to replicate in your own house. Like someone who literally just buy the ingredients for yourself and make it yourself. So they will have to eventually be forced to do it by just looking at the reality. There'll probably be a few more things like EVALI with the THC, the THC vapes, cannabis vapes, that might happen. And the FDA will try and say, well, this is why everything needs to be banned. But I think in a couple of years, that argument won't fly anymore. People will recognize that the only way to deal with the problems that are on the illicit market is to provide consumers with a legal, regulated market. That's it.
That they like.
That's the only way. No matter what the drug is, no matter what the product is, if consumers want it, the only way to make sure that they have a safe way to get it is to have a legal market for it. That's it.
Yeah. And I mean, the government is starting to recognize that.
I think they are. And DEA is pushing back so hard. Like all the old school drug warriors, they want to hold on to that racket as long as possible. And of course, then the drug dealers, like the cartels, want to hold on to that as well. I mean, they're having a really hard time right now with the American cannabis industry being so good and so profitable that they're not making money off that anymore. P.S. If they're not already doing it, they are going to get into the flavored vapes game instantly, as soon because cannabis is no longer profitable for them.
Listen, if the cocaine and heroin drug cartels make a hard right turn into flavored nicotine products, I'm not entirely opposed.
Well, this is so except for
as long as we have a viable marketplace for those products.
In most of the drug conversation, most of the drug debate, you have big tobacco, big bad guy, pharmaceutical companies, big bad guy, cartels. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the cartels, but they almost never talk about drug dealers anymore as being big bad guy, because they recognize, especially if it's something like cannabis that's used by a huge number of Americans, most people, and honestly this is true of bootleg cigarettes, most people don't view their dealer as a big bad guy. They view them as the awesome guy who gets them what they want. That they're the purveyor of the market that they truly want. They may say like, yeah, I wish I didn't have to go to this person and I could just get it at a store, but they don't see them as a big bad guy. So like a lot of people think of the cartel, they don't think they're bad because they're selling drugs. They think they're bad because of all the other stuff they do, because of the violence and maybe human trafficking, stuff like that. Like, the selling of the drugs part is, they're selling to people who want drugs.
Yeah. Well, the social justice thing is a big thing when it comes to the left and supporting the drug, going against the drug war. And we just recently had unfortunately, another Black teenager tased by a policeman for vaping outside in a park. Mm-hmm. And do you think that'll bring people over from the left to be like, really, we got to relook at this? And why are we opposing things like vaping when people are when this is what these laws are doing?
It's starting to happen. It is, I think, and with Bloomberg being in the space now, in the drug space, and which is a lot of criminal justice reform space. Frankly, those are two. There's a lot of overlap in those two spaces. I think there are a lot of people personally that I know who are in either one of those, either the drugs or the criminal justice reform, who recognize what is happening right now with vapes, with tobacco, and has been happening with tobacco, that it is part of a drug war. It is drug war adjacent, if not part of it, or in an early stage. But they are not yet they are not yet embracing the idea of getting involved or talking about it, partially because it's scary, because tobacco is one of those things where if you come out in any way saying maybe we shouldn't do this, like maybe we shouldn't ban this or tax this or restrict this, you're labeled as a shill. You're in with the tobacco companies. You're probably getting paid by big tobacco somewhere. We know it. Or, some really horrible racist comments that I've already seen made, often by people of the same race, saying, you're a traitor, this kind of stuff. So tobacco is one of those issues. I know for researchers too, forever, it is a very scary issue, because if you say one thing wrong, you're out. Like, you're labeled and you're out.
But what's crazy is that we also know that it's sort of self-medication for a lot of people with the nicotine. So if they do succeed in eliminating all tobacco, what do they think all these people are going to go use instead?
other drugs. But yeah, no, that's the
Is
other
it
thing.
clear?
I know a few people have talked about this, that the importance of getting somebody like the National Academies of Science and Medicine or NIH putting out a grant to do one of those big studies about the benefits of nicotine, like they do, the medical benefits of nicotine, as they did with cannabis, because that study, it was back in the 90s, I believe. The first version of it, the medical benefits of cannabis, was a lightning rod on the cannabis debate. It was the thing that really changed the debate. That's when it became about medical cannabis first, because it's got medical benefits. And that, that became the rhetorical, I mean, it was true. Obviously, it was true about the medical benefits, but it became such a powerful rhetorical device in the political debate about cannabis. And the minute that, we need to have that happen with nicotine, one, because we know how extraordinary and what a variety of benefits there are based on the research we have. We just need a powerful and respected body, funded by the government, to create a compendium of like what we know about the benefits right now, so that we can truly start talking about the medical benefits of nicotine as a self-medication. Not that it should be medicalized, and put through like with cannabis. I talk about this all the time too, where I'm like, tea. I use tea, and we use certain foods like chicken noodle soup. It isn't a pharmaceutical, but it is a thing that we use to treat ourselves when we don't feel well. It's kind of the coffee when you wake up not feeling well. So like, we don't have to medicalize everything, but we should recognize that medicine and therapy, it isn't always what we think it is. And we should allow people to use whatever it is they need to feel better and to function properly in this world, because it's already hard enough. That's why whenever I see the moderate light alcohol, I'm like, life is hard enough. Can you leave people one glass of wine alone? Like,
Right.
one drink a night, can you please leave them alone? They've got enough to deal with.
Has anybody ever looked at that? Has anybody ever looked at the fact that as smoking rates have plummeted, that where do those people turn to instead? I mean, I would suspect that my mom, she quit smoking and she became obese, and she was and she was on a lot of antidepressants, and nicotine, actually, she had a gut problem that actually nicotine would have helped. It's been found to now help treat her with. And so I wonder about that. They never stop to think about the consequences of that. You're taking away something that all these people are finding perfectly acceptable. I mean, my nicotine I have never had to take antidepressants. I got a little heavy for a while, but I never got as big as my mom did, but if they take my nicotine away, now I'm going to have to take, maybe that's what they want. They want me to be buying my drugs from pharmaceutical companies that's FDA approved, that possibly could give me a brain tumor like my mom had,
that because there just there've been studies of, very specific, like irritable bowel syndrome or, seizure disorders, that kind of stuff. But there, no one is really talking about the wider breadth of benefits. There have been some studies about exactly what you mentioned, is the likelihood of obesity after quitting smoking. I'm not sure if that's been done. I think there was a comparative study. There was a study, I believe, maybe one study I'm aware of, where they did compare the weight gain of people who switched to vaping versus going cold turkey.
I've seen that.
Yeah, but no, I think once a respected government body or agency funded by a government body is putting out here is what we know about the benefits, you will see more grants, you will see more interest, and being like, okay, maybe we should look at some of this and how people's, when they quit vaping, what happens? Because, right now there's a big push for strategies to help youth or anybody else quit vaping, which is good, because there are a lot of people who truly do, they wanted to transition from smoking to vaping, and now they want to transition away from vaping. And if they can do that without smoking, great. But we really do need to study at this point. If that is what we're doing, we need to put some money. If we're going to be putting money into figuring out how to get people to quit, we need to put some money into figuring out what happens to them afterwards. Like, what are the effects of that? Not just that they quit nicotine, yay, I guess, but what is happening?
Why were they doing it? Why were they doing it in the first place?
What is happening to their mental health? What is happening to other aspects of their physical health?
Exactly.
And it is a shame, it's partially a shame because it's just a missed opportunity for the money grubbers, like the money grubbing researchers out there. You're like, come on, talk to NIH and say, look, I will study. This is important. I will study this thing for you. Give me money, please. So I don't know why they're not doing that right now. I guess all the money is still going towards studying the harms.
Well, we have seen, we're updating our timeline for 2021 and just going through some of the stuff that Kristen has collected, the news stories and research that came out. I mean, there are NIH studies out there and they just don't receive the same fanfare as like all your kids are dying. So,
oh yeah, never do.
But yeah,
yeah,
so
they're NIH, but yeah, I would really love to see the national academies do a compendium, a big, you know, it would take a few years probably to compile it, just be like, this is what we know about the benefits of nicotine. Now everybody else needs to go and figure out where we're wrong and where we're right, and in which forms it's best or not.
I just hope it doesn't take them too long, because a lot of people are going to die if they drag their feet on it.
Yeah, here's the thing. It probably won't happen here. It probably won't be the national academies. It'll probably be somewhere in the UK, maybe New Zealand, you know. We just need we need one of the countries to do it. And I mean, I'm shocked how in the US we're looking at, you know, big government-funded studies and saying, that's just 5 guys in a room after a meal. They just smoking and hanging out, and they just came up with this random number. And I'm like, whoa, I never would have expected American researchers to diss so hard, like a respected ally government like the UK. But like they are so desperate to discredit anything positive about nicotine or e-cigarettes that they're willing to go that far.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we are here at 6 o'clock on the East Coast, about a little over an hour and a half in. Alex does still have legislation for us to run through, which absolutely after this, you're more than welcome to stick around for current legislation if you'd like to, Michelle. But I would definitely like to personally say thank you for joining us, and I'm sure Alex and Kristen feel the same way. And for everybody out there, I have a ton of respect for you, not only in your writing and what you do, but also the way you speak to people, particularly on Twitter. I have watched Michelle have conversations with journalists on Twitter and change their opinions. Really, when it comes to talking to the public or just talking to people in general about these sensitive topics, you have a way about you with connecting to people. And I encourage people to follow you and watch the way that you speak about these things, and watch the way that you approach people who have, differing opinions, because you really do an amazing job. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you for, writing all the fantastic things that you do and researching all the fantastic things that you do. You are you're a treasure in this space, Michelle. So we appreciate you for sure.
We have to have her back, because an hour and a half wasn't enough time. I could just pick your brain for. I'm sorry I went an extra half hour that I should have, but I had a feeling we go a little long, because you just have so much. You're just a wealth of information.
I'm sure there will be another. There will be several opportunities, I'm sure, to have you back on, and something else that you've covered that is super relevant to this.
Well, because that's been around for a while, and we don't plan on going anywhere. So plenty of opportunities in the future.
Please don't. I need you guys to, like, I'm in the process now of figuring out how I can track, because there's so much happening in this space, figuring out how I can track it better. And so right now I mostly just keep going to CASAA's website. that's how I do it. So please don't go anywhere. Otherwise I'll be completely out of the loop on everything that's happening.
That's good to hear. I'm glad people are finding it useful.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and all the kind words that I'm completely blushing from.
But with that, everybody, please go follow Michelle. You are welcome to stick around if you'd like to, or this is also your opportunity to exit stage left.
I'm going to go watch the season 2 of True Detective.
There you go.
Enjoy.
Perfect.
Thanks again, Michelle. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye.
All right, Alex.
That was awesome.
Yeah, Michelle's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to say, like, my first interview with Michelle years ago, I was like, oh, we're gonna be done with this in like a half hour, 45 minutes. That was my goal for interviews. And Kristen, I think yours and mine was one of the longest,
like 2 hours
in Rise in Vape history. It was like almost 3 hours or something.
Was it that long? Oh my god!
I'm gonna do half-hour interviews for this podcast. It's gonna go great. And my first one with Michelle was like an hour and a half too. So she really is. She's just a joy, and she's a wealth of knowledge. And I really do encourage people. I've watched in real time Michelle speak to people on Twitter and have journalists go back and either make adjustments, make edits, retract things. She's helped change people's opinions on some of these topics as well in real time. She just has a way about her about speaking factually and compassionately and respectfully to people. And I encourage people to follow that lead, especially on places like Twitter. But without any more hold up or gushing over Michelle, Alex, I know you are ready. I'm not even going to ask you if you're ready. I know you're ready. Let's
do the thing.
Legislation. All right, what do you got for us this week, Alex? What do we need to keep our eyes and ears on?
I'm going to keep this really quick because I don't have to keep it quick. This is just what's going on. So actually, I should go chronologically here. Colorado had the flavor ban bill in Colorado. I think the next step that we were waiting for there was getting to the Finance Committee, and it has arrived. This again, as we've noted with other bills going to finance committees, this is a money committee, so they're going to want to hear arguments about money. Our message hasn't really changed, so people are, of course, encouraged to continue reaching out to members of the committee, their own lawmakers, tell your story, and tell them to oppose HB 22-1064 in Colorado, which would be a flavor ban. And so this hearing is on Monday. This coming Monday, April 4th, 1:30 p.m. That is House Committee Room 0112. And yeah, that's the big update for Colorado. Still in the House, so there's many more opportunities to get engaged with this. But why not go ahead and get engaged now? And so yeah, Colorado. We're going chronologically and alphabetically here today. The next stop,
you're achieving both.
The next and final stop, but by no means the last. There's tons of stuff out there. This is just what's being updated this weekend. If you are in Rhode Island, this is a continuation of an alert that we put out earlier. Oh wow, did I just put this? Yeah, so it hasn't been that long. Originally, this was scheduled for a hearing. The hearing was canceled. I can just check my own notes here. So on the 27th, we put out our alert. The hearing was announced for the 29th. These bills were taken off the agenda, and now they have been moved to a hearing on April 5th. That's Wednesday, right? Or Tuesday? Tuesday. I just did Monday the 4th. I should have remembered that Tuesday will be the 5th. Math. These are flavor ban bills. And I know that there are probably folks in Rhode Island, I'm just assuming, who think that, well, the Department of Health has already banned flavors. Why should I care about this? Because getting things enshrined in the state code is harder to change. I don't know, your Department of Health is really just a lot of unelected bureaucrats to begin with. So it's not like it's any easier to change the Department of Health rule. But there's really no reason to have this codified. So, and of course, it is an opportunity for advocates in Rhode Island to stand up, make your voices heard. This is part of the debate and conversation that can bleed into changing the Department of Health rule. Perhaps if there is enough opposition to these bills in the legislature, it will motivate someone to make a change in the Department of Health. We have already seen in last year a bill I want to say Representative Casimiro introduced a bill to overturn the Department of Health's flavor ban rule. So this is all kind of part and parcel of the same effort to fix things in Rhode Island, opposing these bills, supporting a different bill to undo the flavor ban, and putting pressure on the health department to align their policy more with reality would be very helpful. So if you are in Rhode Island, the hearing is on Tuesday. The time is the rise of the House, which I don't know that I can give a time for that. Sometimes it's 10 in the morning, sometimes it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It kind of depends on where you are and what their schedule is. So even if you're not allowed, or even if you're not able or available to show up and testify at this hearing, by all means, take advantage of our engagement and send your messages to lawmakers. And if you want to make phone calls too, all you need to do to make phone calls is on our website, go to the, no, it's not resources, get involved, legislator lookup, and it's a really simple form. Just put your address in. We're not collecting this information. You're not going to end up on a list somewhere. It's just, this is how you find your lawmakers. And it will give you all the contact information for all your elected officials. It's very easy. Just take their phone number, and you can use the talking points that we've provided here. Always put the talking points in. And this is a really easy way for you to, it's not really a script. You're going to have to come up with some of your own words, but share your opposition to these flavor ban bills and any other legislation. Just, you can read our list here and get your voice heard. And phone calls do have an impact. Really hearing a human voice on the other end makes a difference. But failing
not
that,
a bot or a spammer then.
right?
Yeah, and I try to give people advice when it comes to phone calls, because I talk to people a lot about this who are fine sending emails and whatever, but when it comes to a phone call, there's a lot of anxiety involved. There's a lot of, I have to talk to another human being about this, and script it for yourself. Write up something brief that you want to say, script it for yourself, and know most of the time, whoever you're contacting, your lawmaker, you're not going to speak to them. You're going to speak to an assistant. You're going to speak to somebody like that who just wants to make some notes about what your concerns are, take your name, take your information, your general concerns, and then that phone call is done. When I make calls, they're 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and I have yet to speak to Kristen Gillibrand or Chuck Schumer. They're not answering my calls. That's just the reality of it. It really isn't anything, too wild. I think a lot of people just work themselves up like, oh, I'm gonna speak to my, my lawmaker here. I'm going to speak to my representative or something. And chances are there's a really good chance that you're not. And there's a really good chance too that it's just going to be, maybe a voicemail message or something like that. So script something up short and brief that conveys your message. And I promise you, it's over in a few minutes, and it can really, truly make a world of difference. Like Alex said, when people can actually hear a voice, or when your lawmakers are told, hey, we have people calling. Like, I've actually spoken to concerned constituents of yours on the phone. When they convey that message, that's gonna hold some weight to it. So for people who are concerned, yes, maybe it can be a little nerve-wracking. Maybe you feel a little anxious about it, but I promise you, it does make a world of difference, and it really is brief, and it's not as bad as you're making it out to seem.
No, just to add to that is that it's because you're most likely passionate about it. I've found that when I'm passionate about something, and that I remember that you know more than the person you're talking to about it. And I think that's one of the things that used to always make me afraid, is that I go up to speak about something and it's like that you feel like you're going to be called out, or you're going to look stupid or whatever. We as advocates, and you people out there, our audience, are so much more educated on this whole thing than the people you're going to be talking to on the phone. And that gives you a lot more confidence when you think of it that way, is that you know what you're talking about, you're passionate about what you're talking about. So even if you get to talk to your actual representative, just remember that this person used to run a real estate company or a car dealership, or had some kind of business that they were running, or were an activist. They're just a person. They're not super. I mean, we know they're not super smart, because just look at them on the floor where you're trying to testify to. They're just people. They're not superhumans. So just remember, they're just people like you, and they're not celebrities. I mean, yeah, they get on the news and stuff, but they're just people, and they just kind of ended up on the news because of their job. And so don't be afraid of them, and just remember that you know more than what they do.
And with that, I think we're done.
That wraps it up, huh? Well, you know what? We were shooting for 2 hours and we almost made it. But
I was shooting for 20 minutes ago. So
that is definitely gonna wrap it up this week. Michelle in chat, thank you one last time for joining us today. It was fantastic having you. Keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate it for sure. And so does all of CASAA, all 250,000 plus members of CASAA appreciate you. And that's a good segue into, if you are not yet one of that 250,000+ people, I don't know, you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it all wrong. No, you're not doing it all wrong, but this is this is actually a fantastic opportunity for you to go join CASAA. Head over to CASAA.org. There's links all over the descriptions to these videos, as well as in the SoundCloud descriptions and wherever you consume your podcasts. But it's CASAA.org. It's absolutely free to join. And all the good things that come with that, the emails, the calls to action, everything that you can participate in. And Danielle will yell at me if I don't talk about how fantastic and streamlined and wonderful our website is, along with all the great new designs we have for merch as well. It's a fantastic way to not only support CASAA and support tobacco harm reduction, but also to be that walking billboard for tobacco harm reduction. So that's a great thing that we can all do. I need to get one of the new t-shirts. I still rock my old New York CASAA t-shirt, but I gotta get some new ones. I gotta get some new ones soon so I can be cool like everybody else here.
And the website's getting updated soon too. We're going to be revamping the whole legislative state page thing soon. So.
And a fun little story before we go. I get asked kind of all the time, DMs and social media and whatnot, like, Logan, what's going on? What can we do? What can we as consumers do? And I had a conversation with somebody a little while ago who was like, you know what we need? We need a quick link, easy way for people to look up who their legislators are. And I just shot them the CASAA legislator lookup link. And I was like, here, bro, we already got it. We're CASAA, man. Like, of course, it's right there. It's easy to share around. So all those resources that we have on CASAA, please, if everybody's, if you're ever asked, where can I get this? Where can I find that? Chances are we've got it at CASAA. It's easy to find, thanks to Danielle and all the work that she's put into the site. So it's all there. It's all easily available to everybody. I agree, Ern. I wish all websites operated as smoothly, as concisely as the CASAA website does. Yeah. It's a pretty slick site. If you guys haven't been there, again, you're doing it all wrong. All wrong.
Our testimonials are growing too.
Yeah. This is where we're going to wrap it up this week, everybody. Thank you to everybody who stuck around the extra half hour today. You're awesome. I believe, as far as I know, same time, same place next week. I don't think we have any weird conflicts of interest. I don't think we have any weird conflicts in the schedule or anything like that, but we should be back 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 over on the other coast. I heard Alex say this on the space this last week. You're all going to have to do your Google foo for everywhere in between or the rest of the world. So that's going to do it for us. Everybody be excellent to each other. Remember that we are all CASAA, not just the panel, not just the board, but everybody. We're all CASAA, and we will continue doing what we do.
All right.
For us.
Peace.
Take care, everybody.